an ever-changing world, Off Hollywood Media presents a voice of truth and inspiration, resonating a vibration of love and understanding, illuminating new paths for new directions, as we, as one, strive for higher and higher levels of consciousness, always remembering life changes. And now, your host, our MC, our master of change, Filippo Voltaggio.
Ciao, everyone. I am so excited about today's show, and I know I say that every week, and every week I mean it. And the interesting thing is in the past, 3-4 weeks, a month or so, it's been getting more and more and more exciting. I feel like I'm going to explode if it gets any more exciting. The main reason for my excitement today is because we have a really special guest on who is so difficult to get because right now, like literally right now, he's working on a movie, he's working on his book, trying to finish that as quickly as possible, and he's getting ready for a conference he's doing in LA, which we'll tell you more about in just a moment. So he's in the middle of all this, and yet he still was able to take time and be with us today on the show. His name is David Wilcock, and if you're not familiar with David, you're in for a treat. As a matter of fact, some of you might be in for a shock or an awakening. This man is absolutely fascinating, and and I mean him. He is absolutely fascinating as a person and his experiences, and then what he talks about is just as fascinating. So couple that together, and we're in for an exciting trip. Buckle your seatbelts, literally, and we'll talk about that and what that means. You know, it's interesting. This weekend, a friend of mine asked me to help her edit her book that she's writing. And as I was reading it, I gathered that it was a book pretty much for teenage girls, about teenage girls. And as I was doing this, I thought, wow, I'm not really the one to ask here. I mean, I'll help with certain aspects of it, but I don't know what it's like being a girl, much less what it's like being a teenage girl. And it got me thinking how many times we look to people for questions or answers that they have no clue, excuse me, how to answer, yet we wished they would, and sometimes we rely on them. And I'm talking about our government. I'm talking about Congress. I'm talking about senators and politicians. And I'll give you an example. When I was little, we were getting ready as a family to go on a big trip, like an 8-hour trip from Monterey all the way down to San Diego, which we did about twice a year to visit family. And on one particular trip, by the way, my dad was a real stickler. We had to get up at a certain time, and he wanted to be on the road by a certain time, and he just wanted to make sure that the family was safe and that we weren't driving at night and that he was wide awake and all of that stuff. So I understand all that now. But at the time, it was just such a big ordeal. And there were a lot of us in the car, and my grandmother with us, so the dog. He had a lot of responsibilities. So once my dad got in the car, there was absolutely nothing that could get him back out of the car and back into the house. You know, once we left because we had 8 hours of drive ahead, and that didn't include stop time, etc. So many times my mother would say, "Oh, I forgot and my dad would say, "Too bad, we're gone," even if we were in the driveway. Well, at this point, on one particular trip, my dad was in the car, and my mom yells out, "Nino," to my father, his name, "come quickly." Well, he could tell from her voice that this was different from all the other requests that she had. And he rushed upstairs, and he came back downstairs in a confusion and got something out of the car and rushed back up upstairs. And us brothers didn't know what was going on, and we just looked at each other like, what's happening? There was one person missing from the car, my sister, and she didn't come down, and we thought something must have happened to her, so we were really worried and confused. And so later on, after a lot of commotion and a lot of time, my sister came down, and it was her. She was the problem why we got delayed. Or it was confusing. Was she the problem?
Hi there, this is David Wilcock, and you're listening to Life Changes with Filippo. Filippo has had an undisclosed computer problem. We're trying to figure out exactly what happened, but if you were listening to the show prior to this point, you'll notice that he got completely knocked off the air while he was describing an interesting personal story. So rather than have you guys listen to music and wait for Filippo to get back on, what I did is volunteer to carry the show until we can actually get him back. I was quite flattered by Filippo's introduction of me. I hope I can live up to the sizzle that he put out there. There are a lot of very interesting things going on right now that I was looking forward to talking to you about, so let's get into some of them. Bottom line is that my work involves bringing together science and spirit from a perspective that is a lot more grounded in rational, empirical research than most people's investigations into these categories ever get. To that effect, I've done a lot of work with DNA. In fact, I'm in contact with a Russian scientist right now. I've been emailing with him in the last few days, named Dr. Peter Gariev. And among other things, he was able to take the blood. It sounds a little strange, just bear with me here. He took the blood from a child and then was able to energize the blood and zap it into an old woman's mouth who had no teeth and was actually able to regrow teeth in her mouth. And I just asked him for photographs of this, and in fact, fully 5 different teeth were able to regrow from this process when previously all of them had been removed. They were the 4 wisdom teeth in the back and then 1 in the front. So possibly with modifications of this technology, you could regrow a full set of teeth. He also did experiments with rats where he was able to regrow a pancreas after he had destroyed it with a toxin that creates diabetes. And this only takes 12 days. So he used the wave information in this case from a healthy pancreas and zapped it into the sick one. Now, the reason why I'm bringing up any of this DNA stuff is that his most fantastic experiment involved actually transforming eggs that had been laid by a frog into salamanders. So instead of having frog embryos, you had salamander embryos that then grew into adulthood and showed no signs of ever having been a frog in the first place. So as wild as this... Oh, Filippo, are you there?
Actually, I am. I'm fascinated by your story and don't want to interrupt. So if you could bring that one to a closer click so we could get to all the other stuff that everybody's expecting.
Sure, very good. Just to conclude that thought then, the idea that the salamander DNA wave could be transformed out of existing biological material from a frog can then be extrapolated to the basis behind evolution, and the idea that human evolution is undergoing a similar metamorphosis, which, through a much longer discussion we can track back around, is actually being caused by a galactic effect. So we're having a movement into a higher zone of energy in the galaxy, which is having a discontinuously massive effect on all of the planets in the solar system, and also is having measurable effects on our DNA, so that we have a guy, Dr. John Hawkes, anthropologist from University of Wisconsin, who showed that in the last 5,000 years, human DNA has been evolving at a skyrocketing speed. And we don't know where it's going yet, but I believe that the changes are going to lead to spiritual evolution akin to the great Tibetan lamas or the yogis or someone like Jesus, the master, that these will become commonplace things that we all are able to do. So that's basically what I'm bringing to the table, and that's obviously why, Filippo, you're so interested in having me on the air today.
Basically, that's what you're bringing to the table. No, that's a whole new thing that I had no idea you knew about or could talk about. I have a whole list of things that we don't have time to cover today that you are all about. So you just added that, and you also added co-host of a show to your resume. Thank you for filling in really quickly there. I appreciate it. I could actually hear you at one point, but you couldn't hear me, and I was hearing what you were doing, and I was liking it. You know, we don't have time for me to finish the story about my sister, but suffice it to say, I was clueless. And so at this point of my life, if anybody were to ask me what it's like to be a girl or a teen girl going through puberty is what that was all about, I wouldn't know, and I would say, go talk to a woman. And the reason I bring up that story is because this morning I was watching David Wilcock. Now, I get to watch him on YouTube, and I have some of his videos, and I got to see him live and actually interview him once live on camera. And every time I'm watching him and listening to him, I'm fascinated by him. And I was thinking, what more do we need? Do we really need a senator to tell us that there are UFOs or to tell us that this information is true? And that's what I was thinking. If I don't know what it's like being a girl, what do the senators know about UFOs and aliens and quantum physics and all these things? They know how to be politicians. So why are we putting pressure on these people? Yes, it'd be nice if they said this is true. But we've got people like David Wilcock. And so the amount of information that he brings to the table and people like him is so, I mean, is so major and so definitive in so many ways. It's here. We have each other, and maybe this is part of the shift. Is we don't need to go to people who say they're in authority, or we have put them in authority when in places that they shouldn't be in authority. They shouldn't necessarily be in authority when it comes to spirituality or comes to the shift or these kinds of things. We need new people who are authority, and David Wilcock is quickly making his way to being one of these people. So, David, if you thought you liked my introduction before, how do you like that one?
Well, if you want to feel what it's like to be a girl, I can give you a bra and panties you can wear. And if you want to feel what it's like to be in a UFO, I can build you one of those. So,
but it still wouldn't be the same. But I'm sure you could build us a UFO. You know, let me just tell the folks who don't know you that David is an author. He's a professional lecturer, a filmmaker, and a researcher of ancient civilizations, consciousness science, and new paradigms of matter and energy. And his upcoming Hollywood film Convergence unveils the proof that all life on Earth is united in a field of consciousness which affects our minds in fascinating ways. And so, David, we appreciate you taking the time to be with us today because we know you're working on the movie and the book. And also you've got a conference coming up June 25th through the 27th. That's this weekend here in Los Angeles, and it's called Los Angeles Convergence. And so in that conference, you're going to be talking about a whole lot of things. Let's talk about first, we're going to talk about some of those, but can I tell you, I was watching a video where you talked about a jump room to Mars. Could you briefly tell us what that's about?
Sure. This is obviously one of the more technically involved discussions because we're now dealing with a technology that, to most people's mind, would be considered science fiction.
Right.
Because what it involves is basically your idea of a Stargate, where you have instantaneous transmission of a human through a traversable wormhole with no apparent duration in the trip. And the idea that it only goes to Mars is also a misnomer because, in fact, you can basically go anywhere with this technology. The way that it works, to my understanding, is basically this. There are 3 real dimensions in the universe, but we are not in them now. The reality that we're in is actually a false reality, if you will, where we perceive 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time. But in the real universe, there's actually 3 dimensions of time and 3 dimensions of space, and these exist as 2 parallel realities. Now, these 2 parallel realities weave together like braided hair within every single atom in this entire universe. So you can't ever escape the parallel reality. It's around you all the time. But if you can pop over the light speed boundary, which means if you can increase the frequency of the atoms in your body or in a piece of material, you can increase the frequency of those atoms so that they're now spiraling faster than light speed, then based on a slight modification to some relativity equations by this guy in Russia, Dr. Vladimir Ginzburg, the typical Einstein belief is that as you go towards the speed of light, your mass increases, so that by the time you reach light speed, you're now infinitely massive. And skeptics use this all the time to attack UFOs and say, well, nobody can travel faster than the speed of light. You would be so massive that you wouldn't have anywhere to go. You'd be as big as the whole universe. Ginsburg showed, hey, look, flip the equation upside down. You don't violate any laws of physics. Everything works fine, except that now instead of gaining mass as you go towards light speed, you lose mass, meaning that when you hit light speed, you have no mass left. So then the idea is, well, where does all the mass go? The mass goes into a parallel universe in which time is three-dimensional. So if you pop into that universe in one place and then travel what you think of as distance in that universe and then pop back out, what you've actually done is teleport, and in the process, by automatic design, you've also traveled in time. You can't avoid traveling in time. So in my new book, 2012 Enigma, what I'm doing is bringing together a huge amount of information that's all based on credible witness testimonies from a variety of people in a variety of different scientific situations, proving that this is actually happening all the time, that even just the process of shielding gravity, if we were ever to get an anti-gravity technology, and there's many ways to do it, any travel through space by nullifying gravity is automatically time travel, because as soon as you switch off gravity, you pop over all the atoms in that area into this parallel reality where you're now traveling in time. You can still see everything because, of course, all the atoms here exist in this parallel universe, but now when you move around in the parallel universe, you're traveling in time over here. So actually, if you head east, you're heading into the future, and if you head west, you're heading into the past. Because if you head east, you're heading ahead of where the Earth has been moving, and if you head west, you're heading behind where the Earth was when you went in. So there's all kinds of evidence of this. There was a National Airlines 727 jetliner approximately in 1969 flying into Miami International, and they thought everything was fine, but what happened was that to the people on the ground, they disappeared for 10 minutes, and then they showed back up again in the exact same spot. During those 10 minutes, there were distress calls. Other planes had flown through the same area. They had choppers out there. They had all kinds of people looking for these guys. They were gone. Then they popped right back in 10 minutes later and didn't think anything was wrong. When the plane landed, the FCC found that everybody's watch on the plane was 10 minutes too slow. As if it was like 8:50 p.m. when they popped into the vortex, they popped back out of the vortex, and now it's 9 o'clock to everybody on Earth, but for them it's still 8:50 p.m. They did not go 10 minutes through time. So effectively what you asked me is, how does this work if you're going to travel to Mars or anywhere else? And the answer is that you're basically moving through a parallel reality in which time is three-dimensional. So I hope that isn't too confusing.
Well, wow, such detail that you're able to give on this, and much like your videos, your answer is intriguing, obviously fascinating, and it has me appalled also in a way, because if this is true, which I believe you believe this is true, and I sense that there's truth here being spoken, then there is the technology and the knowledge for that is so far from where the mass population is kept, from where we live, and it appalls me that this information isn't for all of us. Can you see of a reason other than greed, that this information wouldn't be allowed us?
Yeah. But they're equally as nefarious and negative as greed. It all basically files under the same subheading.
Okay.
The powers that were, as I like to call them, were concerned about the destruction of the economic system, because as soon as you give people gravity shielding technology, if they want to go visit grandma, then they could go visit grandma in the past. But they could also go visit Grandma in the future and then look on Grandma's computer and check the stock market and see what happened to the price of gold or something. And in so doing, you could basically insider trade against the future, and they feel that that would ruin the economic system because the economic system is based on not knowing what's going to happen.
Wow. So this brings me to a question I was actually having this morning while I was watching the video on the pineal gland that you were talking about. And
Right.
You even talk about the Vatican having this information, as a matter of fact, statues honoring the pine cone, etc.
That's true. St. Peter's was built in the 1500s, and right back then they built this gigantic statue of a pine cone in the middle of this area they call the Court of the Pine Cone. And then you got to wonder, why would you make a pine cone the single most impressive religious symbol of this entire area within St. Peter's Cathedral? And obviously the answer is that, you know, it's an ancient legend that describes a gland in the brain, which is basically the anchor point between these two parallel realities I was speaking about. If you want to access this other world, if you want to teleport, if you want to time travel, if you want to levitate, if you want to have instantaneous healing, instantaneous telepathy, all of the Jesus stuff, all the miracles, you need to switch on that pineal gland. That's where everything comes from.
You know, David, you talked about DMT and ayahuasca and other ways of activating the pineal gland, these being drugs or plants, actually. But the reason that I understood from you and from other people that talk about this, that we open our pineal gland or access it, is so that we could reach high levels of spirituality and of knowledge and of understanding. So the question comes to me that if people in the government or higher above the government, if for those who believe in that, or people in the Vatican, and if they're accessing this area of the brain that's supposed to bring spirituality and knowledge, why is it that they're not what we would consider spiritual and benevolent?
I will be happy to answer your question as long as I address one area that I wouldn't agree with, and that is you do not need to take drugs to activate the pineal gland.
Right.
You can crack it open with drugs, but then you've got to be able to rebuild the way into that hole without them. Otherwise, you just keep cracking new holes, and you don't actually have any kind of traversable gateway that you can use on your own. So I actually did use psychedelic drugs, predominantly lysergic acid, between the ages of 16 and 19 when I finally stopped using all intoxicating substances. And 3 years of psychedelic drugs was enough to give me a very eye-opening glance into this alternate universe. It's not as insane or powerful as some people would think. I didn't have any, frontal hallucinations or anything like that. But I definitely was aware of time either being much slower or much faster. In fact, I remember one experience where I looked at a clock. It was a digital clock, and I became terrified that I had died because I'd had so many thoughts without the clock ever changing to the next minute. And then when it changed to the next minute, I had this wave of relief, like, oh my gosh, I'm alive. But anyway, getting to the deeper thrust of what you're asking me, these guys are using the dark side of the Force, if you want to bring in the Star Wars analogy. There's two ways to access power from the universe. One of the things that's kind of a bummer for people who are on the positive path is that the universe's design does appear to be that the negative side gets to have access to these gee-whiz powers faster, because what they actually do is they harness the power of the universe, which is it's like raw, pure energy. They harness this power through, basically, there's no other way to say it, black magic. And specifically, if you do sacrifices or things like that, you can actually release the life force from an entity. Now, it doesn't mean that you've captured the entity's soul, but more like the power source that was making that entity run in a physical body can be temporarily diverted and used as a power source. So, other than that, which is like the most excruciatingly disgusting aspect of black magic, you also have the energy of fear. I have a variety of scientific data points that clearly show that when people go through fear, they give off some of this vital energy that we all have in our aura, for lack of a better term. And this is a fluid-like energy that actually does represent raw psychic power, that most of us, we have it in abundance, but we have no idea how to use it because we're not tuned, and so it's just going to waste, basically. However, if you go into fear, then believe it or not, the person that you're afraid of actually receives that energy from you. As long as you're in fear, you send your energy to the source of the fear. And that's one of the things that determines who's going to fight and who's going to survive in the animal kingdom. The animal that's afraid is going to die. And the fear mechanism I'm referring to is also used in pack animals, where their fear is then sent to the alpha male leader. The alpha male leader absorbs the fear from the group as a raw energy, which is then used to strengthen him for the fight against the saber-toothed tiger at the front of the cave, or whatever is attacking.
Wow.
So this is the system. Now, these guys have figured out a way to use this by keeping people in fear so that on a mass scale, they're actually being enshrined as the focal point of everybody's fear and everybody's trust in terms of being their fearless leader, so that they actually do, on a metaphysical level, gain a power source from this that they can use for occult practices, as well as gaining worldly power and financial influence and things like that. So it is a technology. This is why when you get into the Jordan Maxwell stuff, he shows that every piece of American currency has a serial number on it, and those serial numbers are the same as the numbers that appear on the back of your Social Security card, called a stock number. And what that actually means is that every person in America is given a number in which they're issued a certain amount of currency, which is actually traded on the stock exchange very covertly, but you can find it. And so each person, according to Jordan, is given $6.2 million worth of stock in trade, and they basically feel that by circulating the money, no serial number on any piece of American currency is ever going to be a random number. Every one of those numbers corresponds to somebody's Social Security card. It corresponds to a person. So what they feel they're doing is that they're actually absorbing people's energy that's on that particular currency by circulating it. Now, this is the kind of weird stuff that these guys do. I don't think this really works, but they hope that it would. But there is a way in which they are, or they have been, absorbing people's energy and using it, but that's all crumbling apart now. Their power is weakening because this kind of magic only works if it's hidden. And now that it's being exposed and everybody's talking about it, their power source is running out. But the interesting thing is, I've spoken to some guys who are very, very highly positioned within classified programs, black ops, Illuminati, etc. And believe me, not everybody in these groups is supporting the agenda. In fact, I would wager that the majority of the people in these groups do not support the agenda. So, I mean, you have to understand, in my position, somebody comes forward and says, hey, I'm in the Illuminati, I'm not going to automatically paint that person with a brush and say, well, you're evil. Because there's people in every part of society that are victims of circumstance. They're stuck in something. They would be killed if they tried to get out. I've spoken to several people in the Illuminati now. They're scared, but they're also aware that the whole thing is falling apart, and they're giving me information to help me build everybody else's confidence so that we understand that this is really not going to go on much longer. And
David, how much of that information can you give out? I mean, is there anything specific that you can share with us that's saying these are the reasons why we should not give up or be fearful?
My God, there's so many.
Oh, good.
I mean, I track it on my website pretty much week to week. I guess let's see.
Actually, I'm glad you said that because I wanted to give everybody that website. I actually wanted to break and let everybody know that you're listening to David Wilcock on Life Changes with Filippo, and you can learn more about David and our show at lifechanges.ws, and you can also go directly to David's blog or his website, both, and you can find all of that at divinecosmos.com. That's divinecosmos.com. There you can also learn about the Los Angeles Convergence, the conference that's coming up that David is conducting on June 25th through the 27th. So, yes, David, you do talk about it extensively on your blog, how you find the time to write so much and be so detailed, I don't know, but we're grateful that you do. But what you can share with us real quickly would be great.
Sure. Man, there's a lot of different threads on this, but I'll just pick one and go with it. They're printing money out of thin air. And in order for that money to be used, other people have to accept that the money is real. So what's happening is, if I say to you, I have $500 million, and then as a result of the fact that I have $500 million, you can lend me your money, and I will back it up on the good faith that I have $500 million. But I don't have $500 million. I just made it up. But then I'm getting you to trust me with credit and extend me a line of credit based on the fact that I could pay back $500 million if I screw up. Well, what happened is that the Rockefeller faction, which is the ones that are running the Fox News and the Bush administration, Republican right-wing party, and they've been manipulating people who are honest Christians into this foreign ideology that has nothing to do with what Jesus actually was teaching. These guys are not coming from the positive side at all. Most of everybody who is not part of this right wing can see that, and a lot of the people in the right wing are seeing it as well, and they're very discontent, but they have no other option because no one else is speaking to what they call their values. All that being said, this Rockefeller faction, which again does come from a sister group in the Illuminati that was given power in the U.S., given control of the oil. This goes back to John D. Rockefeller. They then broke off from the European royalties and basically formed their own separate faction. What's happened is that they were out there saying, I have so-and-so $1 trillion in credit, which is not true. They just made it up. And then other countries were honoring that and basically lending them money on that good credit. Well, what happened was it all fell through, and I'm making this much simpler than it really is, but it all fell through, and China in particular told them that they had defaulted and that they needed to repay what are called gold contracts, gold futures contracts, with actual gold. These guys are so brazen that they actually sent billions of dollars of gold bullion to China. And when China drilled into the gold bullion, they found that it was all tungsten on the inside and that it was only electroplated with gold on the outside. This has actually seen its way into media, certainly not mainstream media, but credible sources that are out there tracking the gold markets. China is very pissed. Russia is very pissed. Most of the other countries in the world are very pissed. And these guys are shot and bleeding and on the run. And they've been doing some really, really ridiculously stupid things, like creating massive earthquakes in Haiti, in Chile. I believe they're responsible for the volcano, and I believe they're responsible for the oil gusher. So basically what they're trying to do now is say, well, na-na-na-na-na, you can't get me. I'm going to screw up the planet before you can take me down. But the other countries are willing to fight them. And based on all the signs I'm seeing, which include a variety of insider testimonies that all cross-collaborate each other, it appears that we are very imminently close to getting some truly remarkable disclosures in the mainstream. This move to audit the Federal Reserve is another key aspect of it. I believe that fairly soon you're going to see disclosure, you're going to see actually some kind of formal statement about UFOs from official sources, and you're going to see a lot of this occult politics get exposed and put out in the open. I don't know if it's going to be this year. It's terrible to try to make a time estimate because as soon as you do, it gets proven wrong. But sooner or later, and probably sooner, this is going to come out. And when it does, it's going to be very amazing. And I believe that people like myself are going to be put into a much more public role at that time. And on an intuitive level, I have been given extensive preparation to be ready for when that happens, which is going to include a whole lot of work on broadcast television and a lot of other stuff along those lines. So that's the future that I'm seeing coming. It's going to be very interesting once it happens.
Wow, David, you've made some really strong accusations there and about certain people and about certain events that have happened that have hurt a lot of people and animals and the planet and commerce, and just interesting, and it'd be fascinating to delve into that with you. I'm sure you have lots of data that corroborates what you're saying, and I'm sure people can find that on, can people find that on divinecosmos.com?
Yeah, I mean, I apologize for the depressing tone of some of this stuff, but I don't think that denying what's happening is useful. On the other hand, I think too many people are aware of it without understanding that we have prophecies that go back to actually being in stone. The Great Pyramid has a timeline in it that said that the world would hit bottom in 2010. And this has been tracked since the 1800s. Everybody knew 2010 was the big year, and then boom, here it comes, and that's what happens, oil gusher. So the ancients knew about this. They gave us many prophecies of a golden age that would happen, and the golden age prophecies clearly describe some sort of very, very intriguing shift in the whole nature of reality and space-time as we know it somewhere around the year 2012. And so I do believe that the reason why things are getting so crazy and so awful on some levels is because on a planetary level, these are the events that crack through the shell we've built around our hearts. And it's the cosmic slap in the face, it's the wake-up call that makes us realize what we've been doing to the planet, what we've been doing to each other. So when you have the oil gusher, the reason why on the higher spiritual level something like this was allowed to happen is it's such an obvious metaphor. It's showing us oil is destroying the earth. Well, guess what? We've been doing that for 100 years. And these guys, these various insider factions, have been systematically suppressing every possibility for clean, non-burning, free energy, limitless free energy that's ever come out. And there's so many examples of that. Patents and inventors have been destroyed or bribed or bought off or threatened. I mean, I could list, we could go 2 hours just on that.
And we've allowed that. And that's how I started the show, is that we've been looking at our governments, or now these big corporations, saying, well, certainly if there was something better, they would have come out with it by now. Well, now there's so much evidence and so many people like yourself who are out there talking about this, saying, there is another way, and we can't blame anybody but ourselves anymore if we don't do something about it.
Yeah, I would say that the most useful analogy is that we are now going through the planetary dark night of the soul. This is where the entire Earth basically goes, oh my God, what the heck is going on? This is crazy. And even the people who are the most far off in terms of their skepticism, and when they say, oh, this 2012 thing is a bunch of nothing, it's just another year, it doesn't mean anything, well, guess what, buddy? Take a look around your backyard. Because if tar balls are washing up on the shores of Florida, this is not an ordinary year in human history. Something is going on that's very unusual. The economy is in very precarious condition. The California economy is right on the brink of default right now. There's a lot of very intriguing things that are getting ready to happen in which this whole financial system that has been jerry-rigged as a giant casino where the house is pulling all the wealth out of the system, the house in this case meaning these insider groups, it's all going to come collapsing down like dominoes. Now, it's going to look scary when it happens, but the common people's money actually, in a relatively short time, is going to substantially increase in value, because once you get this toxicity out of the system, you can actually allow for a genuine, legitimate economy in which even the quality of life that most people had in the 1950s was only relatively better than what it is now. But even back then, there was a an incredible amount of money that was being sucked and siphoned out of the system. So you have the potential for a massive, massive increase in prosperity. And once you basically get rid of the need to pay for energy, you've also eliminated capital from the equation of economics. And within a reasonable time frame, if there is no need to treat capital as if it was scarce, then you no longer need currency. And that means you don't need a financial system, because basically if you want something, you create it. You create value, you create energy, you create resources, and it doesn't really cost very much, if anything, to do that. Now, I've spoken to people who are inside these programs where this is going to sound very far out, but they actually do go off-world through Stargate technology. They interact with hundreds of different human species, because the galaxy creates human life on any planet where it can grow. So there's a whole bunch of other people out there, and these insider groups have demonized them to make us think that they're going to look scary and that they're going to do scary things. But it's just like a bunch of old white Europeans on their little continent that are, skeptically denying that there could be such a thing as a black man. And then they hear these rumors that there's a black man, and nobody wants to believe it. And it isn't until they actually see one with their own eyes that all of a sudden, now in history, we don't even remember those guys. We don't even remember the skeptics who denied that there could be a Chinaman or a black man. Because once we met them, it was over. It's just like the flat earth. Once we saw the earth was round, nobody remembers the people who thought it was flat anymore. Once we meet all these other people who are out there, and they can range between 1.5 feet tall to 15 feet tall, and a variety of skin colors, most of which are like ours, but they have various pastels in the rainbow colors. You can have yellow, all the different pastel colors in the rainbow. But more or less, they look pretty much the same. I mean, even the type of people you see in, like, Star Trek, where they put ridges on their head like a Klingon, I mean, there's nobody that looks that crazy. They all pretty much look like us. There's some that are a little different, but not too much. So they're out there, and they're basically, any of them that have the ability for interplanetary travel have gotten through this crisis point that we're in right now, and they don't have this burgeoning apocalypse happening. So they gain access to time travel, anti-gravity, all these other technologies. And as a result of gaining access to these technologies, what ends up happening is that they have the ability to basically create a more ethical society, a more ethical world where they don't need energy, they don't need to pay for energy, rather. And they have this ability to see through the spiritual reality to such an extent that they can do things that most of us would consider to be miraculous. There is what we call an ascension that happens, where their abilities now become just like the ascended masters on Earth. And so we already have people in the special projects who are interacting with these folks on off-world basis. And the reason why they've been holding back this technology from the Earth is that they feel that if the average person had access to it, that they'd become couch potatoes and they'd sit around all day doing nothing, and society would be destroyed. So the prophecies they've inherited basically say they get to let us all have this technology after 2012 because then we'll be able to use it responsibly. But in my personal estimation, they have done a grotesquely unfair job of holding it back until the very, very bitter end when they know they have to release it. And so what I'm doing is I'm putting an end run around these guys. I'm doing the Hail Mary pass in the football game and saying, if you're not going to do it, we're going to do it, and you guys are going to be left irrelevant because I can explain all of these technologies and I can teach people how to build them. Nobody has assassinated me, and now it's too late because the cat's out of the bag. Filippo, are you there? All right, well, I guess I should keep going because we're still on the air.
No, we've had some technical difficulties. I hope everybody's been able to hear you all right. You've been cracking up a little bit, but I was able to get the gist of what you were saying, so I hope everybody was too. And frankly, David, I don't know what to do with all this information except to keep an open mind, because I definitely don't want to be
one of these people who afterwards, or who saying that the Earth is flat and there are no Chinamen or black men.
Right.
And so I'm grateful for you who are out there sharing it, and I'm glad that we're putting it out there to as many as are willing to listen to say, hey, let's keep an open mind, let's get more information, and let's go into this new age together intelligently.
Absolutely. And the thing is, I do believe we're dealing with a celestial event, as I said at the beginning, and this is a participatory event. I really hope that people don't think that this is something where you just sit in the backyard with a bong and a beer and wait for 2012. It's very much a do-it-yourself kind of ascension process, and in order to do it yourself, you have to bring your body and mind and spirit, and I say have to because, again, I very rarely use words like must or should or have to, but in this case it's the fact. You have to bring yourself closer into alignment with the actual essence of the universe if you want to be ready for this change that the Earth is moving into. Now, that doesn't mean that some apocalypse is going to happen where everybody who doesn't shift that way goes away. What it does mean is that there appears to be a bifurcation in realities is getting ready to happen here, in which there's going to be two different realities that you can step into. And in one of the realities, life on Earth becomes more and more difficult, certainly not apocalyptic, but over the course of what will seem to be tens of thousands of years of their time, the Earth is going to get more inhospitable, and they're eventually going to have to move away. But then on the other timeline, that length of time only appears to take 100 to 700 years, and for those people, they actually end up inheriting the Earth after everybody else has left, but they've inherited the Earth on a higher plane of existence. And again, this is where it gets very, very esoteric. I can't really prove this at all scientifically, but there's some very intriguing sources of information like the so-called Law of One series that go into extensive detail about this stuff. And the reason why I treat it as credible is that there are many, many scientific things that were brought out in this material that I've been able to validate quite extensively and thoroughly since then. And that validation leads me to believe that if certain postulates are set forward in this material that I can't prove yet, that doesn't mean that they're not true. It just means that they can't be proven yet. And so what that then leads to is the idea that if these forces that gave us the Law of One material are giving us a philosophy, and if the philosophy is clear and understandable and it makes sense, and it's a spiritual philosophy that says, hey, this is what you need to do to be prepared, my inclination is to be prepared so that in the event that this stuff does happen, that I've done what I can do to actually be ready for it. And the most important thing they say you need to do to prepare yourself is to have a growth in your ethical quality, to basically be more loving, more positive, more appreciative of others, appreciative of yourself, more willing to see when you've been wrong, to be accountable, and that the core of all this does come back to forgiveness and acceptance. In so doing of forgiving others, you actually forgive and accept yourself. So forgiving others is forgiving yourself. And it's all a big game that we're playing in a hall of mirrors where every time that we move, the distorted mirrors are moving around us. So if we have blockages and if we have problems and pains in our life, we don't attract people who are going to love us and overlook those pains. We're going to attract people who actually amplify and exaggerate those pains. And then we have the opportunity to heal that. And so if we heal it, then either the other person will rise to the occasion with us and drop the projection, or in some cases they do not heal, and eventually you get to a point where the best thing you can do is to actually withdraw from that person so that you can pursue your own healing on your own. So I always advocate people to try to salvage a relationship first, but if it's been a very long and very consistent pattern where the other person is very clearly disrespecting you, and even when you try to be accountable and you do everything you can to be, listening and attentive and supportive and meet the person halfway, if you're still getting consistently disregarded, disrespected, lied to, stolen from, cheated on, then you might want to look at actually changing your life. People get stuck in this sense of a paradox, that there's no hope, that they're stuck. And that's an illusion based on obligation. If you feel obligated to someone, if you feel that, you cannot leave, you cannot change your life, you have to do this, that's only a paradox created by the ego mind. The higher forces are perfectly willing to withdraw you from any situation if they need to. You should never feel obligated if you're in a situation where you're being clearly and consistently disrespected. That kind of healing work that you have to do in your own life, which is extremely, extremely painful, is some of the most powerful stuff that will actually holographically heal the planet and prepare you for this change, forgiving others and accepting others, and also learning to love yourself so that you have healthy boundaries, so that you can forgive and accept yourself for the times when you actually need to take proactive defensive action to do what's right so that you can continue to live a life that's happy and comfortable. And as you work through these issues, you're actually healing the planet, and it's a very difficult process. It's a very involved process. It brings up great emotions. And so I took all that alchemical work on the self, which can be very traumatic, and actually made a musical out of it, and that's Wander Awakening. And I actually performed some of those songs in my conferences, like the one I'm doing in Los Angeles this weekend at the Westin LAX. So,
Right, and if anybody wants more information on that, they should go to divinecosmos.com.
That's right.
David, wow, as if we weren't overwhelmed enough, thank you for adding another piece on top of that. But you ended with some extremely beautiful words, and you rounded it out so beautifully. And whether people that are listening that are maybe first-time listeners, and if they're skeptical or hearing you for the first time or some of this information, at the very least they can take that away, because if they could do that, then the other stuff doesn't really matter, because it'll all just happen organically and beautifully. They don't even have to worry about it or believe it. They can just do, as you were saying here in your closing, which was really beautiful. So
well, thank
with
you.
that, well, thank you. We're at the top of the hour, and we could go on for hours, I know, and I know you need to get back to your book and your film, and want to remind everybody that we've been talking to David Wilcock, and to learn more about the conference that he's doing this weekend, go to divinecosmos.com, and if you can't remember that, of course, you can always come to lifechanges.ws, and you can learn more about David there. David, thank you for being such a great guest. And, we've never had these kind of technical difficulties before, and I have to wonder if there's a posse following you around to make sure some of this information doesn't go out. But I think we got it out today.
Yes, Filippo. It's actually a spiritual influence that is basically about to lose control of the Earth, and it can, to some degree, manipulate electromagnetic equipment. Even the guys in the Illuminati don't like this spiritual influence. They're very aware of it, and I've spoken to them about it. This spiritual influence basically is only working for itself. But it sees that it's about to lose control of this planet, and so it will try to screw things up like that, but it never can really do that much. It's pretty minor.
Well, we were able to get the message out, and you've been with us, and we're so grateful for it. Looking forward to connecting with you again soon. Thank you so much. David Wilcock, ladies and gentlemen.
It's been a pleasure.
Likewise. So I want to thank everybody for joining us at Life Changes with Filippo, and remind you all to go to our website at lifechanges.ws to hear this information again, hear the archive show, and share it with your friends. And we'll look forward to connecting with you all next week.
You have been listening to Life Changes. Join us here every Monday night at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and visit us on the web at lifechangeswithfilippo.com. That's Filippo, Filippo. And follow our community on Facebook at Life Changes with Filippo. Join us here next week as we consciously embrace and explore the only constant, life changes.